The restaurant Aperture was a cathedral of wealth, all hushed tones and gleaming dark wood. Mark Johnson adjusted his tie, the silk biting at his neck. He was trying to impress his new girlfriend Tiffany, and this was the place to do it. "It's all about access, baby," he whispered, leaning in. "The people who eat here, they run the city." He was bragging about a career-making deal, a new commission that would finally put him in the seven-figure club. He raised his champagne glass just as the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. A woman was being led to the private alcove, and when she turned, Mark's world tilted on its axis. It was his ex-wife, and she was wearing a diamond ring the size of a planet. Mark Johnson loved the sound of Aperture. It wasn't loud. It was the expensive, suppressed murmur of power. It was the discreet clink of wafer-thin crystal, the soft thud of $100-a-bottle wine being placed on linen, the whisper of bespoke suits brushing past. This was his new world, the world he deserved, the world he had shed his old life to obtain. Across from him, Tiffany was practically vibrating. She was 24, all sharp angles and bright blonde hair, with a hunger in her eyes that matched his own. Her dress was a vibrant tight red, a stark contrast to the muted grays and navies of the other diners. She was, Mark thought, the perfect accessory. "I still can't believe you got us a table, Mark," she said, her voice a breathy purr as she filmed the chandelier with her phone. "My friends are dying. They said Aperture has a 6-month wait list." Mark chuckled, a low, practiced sound he'd been perfecting. "It's not about the wait list, Tiff. It's about who you know. And the maitre d', Mr. Beaumont, he knows me. He knows I'm a serious player." This was a minor exaggeration. Mark had actually gotten the reservation by calling in a favor from a client who had called in a favor from his client, but Tiffany didn't need to know the details. In his world, perception was reality. "And this deal I'm closing." Mark leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial hum. "It's the big one. The Chevalier Tower. The new owner is this total recluse, some mysterious El Vale entity that bought the whole high-rise in cash. Nobody can get a meeting, but my boss, he trusts me to handle the initial leasing proposals for the commercial floors. We're talking millions in commissions, baby. Millions." Tiffany's eyes went wide. This was the currency she understood. "Oh, Mark, that's amazing. We could finally get that condo in the city." "Condo, try a penthouse." He sipped his champagne, the Dom Perignon he'd ordered, even though it was triple his car payment. It was an investment in his own image. He was celebrating a victory he hadn't yet won, but confidence was half the battle. "It's just..." Tiffany paused, a flicker of genuine curiosity in her expression. "What was she like?" "Your ex-wife?" "You never talk about her." Mark's smile tightened. The very thought of Laura was like grit in his teeth. It was an unwelcome intrusion of the past of his old mediocre life. "Laura," he scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "What's to talk about? She was comfortable, safe, boring." He searched for the right words to describe the woman he had spent 15 years with. She was the kind of woman who uses coupons. Her idea of a 5-star meal was that local Italian place with the checkered tablecloths. She lacked ambition. She was dead weight. "Wow," Tiffany said, her lip curling slightly. "I can't even imagine you with someone like that." "You don't have to," Mark said, placing his hand over hers. The diamonds in her bracelet, which he was still paying off, felt cold. "That life is over. I cut it out like a tumor. She would never have fit in here. She'd probably be complaining about the prices." He looked around the opulent room, a king surveying his new domain. "This is where I belong. No distractions, no anchors. Just the top." The waiter, a silent man in a crisp white jacket, approached. "More champagne, Mr. Johnson." "Absolutely," Mark said, beaming. "Keep it flowing. Tonight we're celebrating the future." He felt a palpable sense of triumph. He had it all: the beautiful girl, the seat at the power table, the imminent life-changing deal. He had shed his dowdy wife and was finally becoming the man he was always meant to be. He was untouchable. It was in that precise moment of supreme arrogance that the front of the restaurant went still. The low hum of conversation didn't just quiet, it stopped. The clinking of silver ceased. "What is it?" Tiffany whispered, looking towards the entrance. "Is it a celebrity?" Mark turned, annoyed by the interruption. The maitre d', Mr. Beaumont, a man famous for his unflappable, almost icy demeanor, was bowing. He was personally escorting a guest not to a table in the main room, but towards the ultra-exclusive private alcove by the fireplace, the one reserved for billionaires and visiting royalty. Mark squinted. He couldn't see the guest clearly at first, just a silhouette. A woman. She was wearing a simple, elegant black dress. No sequins, no bright colors. She moved with an unhurried grace that commanded the room more than Tiffany's red dress ever could. As she passed under the soft light of the central chandelier, she turned her head slightly to murmur something to Beaumont. Mark's champagne glass stopped halfway to his mouth. His blood ran cold. The smile froze on his face, cracking like thin ice. It was Laura. The memory of the end was one Mark had actively and successfully suppressed. It didn't fit his new narrative. But seeing Laura here in his new world brought it rushing back with the force of a physical blow. It hadn't been a single fight. It was a slow, agonizing bleed. Mark had started working late. Networking, he'd called it. He'd bought new suits. He'd joined a gym that looked more like a nightclub. Laura, meanwhile, was still Laura. She was a database analyst, a quiet, brilliant woman who found beauty in complex code and solace in their small, tidy garden. She had supported him through his MBA. She had worked overtime when he'd been laid off from his first junior associate job. Her steady, reliable paycheck had been the foundation upon which he'd built his ladder. And once he was high enough, he'd decided he no longer needed the foundation. The final confrontation had happened on a rainy Tuesday. Laura was in the kitchen of their modest suburban home wearing an old college sweatshirt, her hair in a messy bun. She was tracking mud in from the garden. "We need to talk," Mark had said, standing in the doorway in his new $2,000 suit. He couldn't even bring himself to step into the room. "Okay," she'd said, turning a smear of dirt on her cheek. "I'm just potting these. What's wrong?" She saw his expression. Her smile faded. "Mark, I'm suffocating Laura." He'd said the words pre-rehearsed. "I'm meant for more than this. More than coupons and gardening and this. This is our home, Mark," she'd whispered. "It's a box, and I'm done being in it." He'd met Tiffany a week earlier at a sales conference. Tiffany had looked at him like he was a god. Laura just looked at him like he was her husband. It wasn't enough. "I want a divorce," he'd said. The devastation had been absolute, but the true cruelty came later. Mark, in his quest to cut anchors, had been methodical. He'd been secretly moving assets for months. When Laura finally met with a lawyer, a harried, court-appointed woman who smelled of stale coffee, the truth was laid bare. "I'm sorry, Ms. Vale." The lawyer, Ms. Petrov, had said, not looking up from the stack of papers. Laura had reverted to her maiden name Vale almost immediately. It was the first thing she'd reclaimed. "What do you mean, it's gone?" Laura's voice was hollow. "Your ex-husband, Mr. Johnson, seems to have drained the joint checking and savings accounts, over $90,000. But how? We both have to sign. He transferred it to his personal business account. He's claiming it as a reimbursement for undocumented corporate expenses over the last 5 years. It's a loophole, a very cynical one. By the time we fight it, he'll have declared it, spent it, or hidden it offshore. It will cost you more to find it than it's worth. The house? He's the only one on the mortgage. You're on the deed, but he refinanced last year without your signature. You're entitled to half the equity, which after the new loan is almost nothing. He's offering you $5,000 to walk away." Laura had sat there a ghost in a plastic chair. He hadn't just left her. He had systematically erased her. He had taken her 15 years of support of shared life of her overtime checks and valued it at $5,000. She'd left the lawyer's office and thrown up in a public trash can. The months that followed were a blur of humiliation. She moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, the air thick with the smell of detergent and exhaust fumes. She got a second, then a third data entry job working late into the night. She sold her car. She sold the pearl necklace her mother had left her. One night, sitting on her worn linoleum floor eating plain rice from a plastic container, she'd received a text. It was a mistake text from Mark. It was a photo of him and Tiffany on a yacht in Miami. He was tan. Tiffany was laughing, holding a bottle of champagne. The text below it, clearly meant for a friend, read, "Living my best life, finally free of the dead weight." Laura had looked at that picture. She'd looked at the eviction notice on her counter. She was 2 weeks late on rent. She hadn't cried. The time for tears was over. The woman who loved gardening and old movies was gone, burned away. What was left was something hard and cold and sharp. She'd deleted the text. She'd paid her rent with the money from her mother's pearls. And then she'd opened her laptop. She was a brilliant database analyst. But her passion had always been something else, something her grandmother had taught her. She had one other asset Mark had forgotten about, a small climate-controlled storage unit where she kept her grandmother's things. Among them a pristine 100-year-old Belgian chocolate conching machine and a leather-bound book of recipes. "Dead weight," she'd whispered to the empty room. "We'll see." Laura Vale started Vale Artisan with $400, the last of her emergency fund. She didn't have a kitchen. The apartment's tiny stove was useless, so she rented time from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. at a failing local bakery. The owner, a kind old man named Mr. Henderson, pitied her and gave her a discount. For the first month, she was a ghost. She'd work her data entry jobs from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., sleep for 3 hours, and then drive her rattling 10-year-old car to the bakery. She'd work in the pre-dawn quiet surrounded by the smell of yeast and sugar. Her hands, once soft, now calloused and burned, learning the feel of the chocolate. Her grandmother's recipes were not for the faint of heart. They were complex, demanding patience and precision. They called for ingredients Laura couldn't afford: single-origin cocoa beans from Madagascar, Tahitian vanilla, raw honeycomb. So she improvised. She used her analyst skills to build algorithms cross-referencing supplier costs, shipping logistics, and commodity market fluctuations. She found a small fair trade co-op in Ecuador that sold incredible beans for a fraction of the cost if you bought in bulk. She couldn't afford bulk, so she took a risk. She took her last paycheck and spent it all on a 50-pound sack of raw cocoa beans. For one terrifying week, she lived on instant noodles, praying the gamble would work. It did. Her first successful batch was a dark chocolate ganache infused with chili and sea salt. It was transcendent. It was deep, complex, and fiery. She packed it in simple, hand-folded black boxes and took it to the local farmer's market. She sold out in an hour. The next week, she sold out in 30 minutes. She started an Instagram page. A local food blogger with 5,000 followers bought a box, posted a glowing review, and Laura's tiny self-built website crashed. Vale Artisan was born. But she wasn't just a chocolatier. She was a businesswoman. She remembered the lawyer's office. She remembered the $0,000 in her bank account. She remembered the word loophole. She vowed she would never, ever be on that side of the table again. She immersed herself in corporate law. She read books on real estate, on asset protection, on shell corporations. She took her growing profits, and instead of buying a new car or a nice apartment, she hired a shark, a corporate lawyer from the meanest firm in the city. "I want to be a fortress, Mr. Chen," she told him, sitting in his polished office, still in her flour-dusted clothes. He'd looked at her, amused. "Fortresses are expensive, Ms. Vale." "I'm not asking for a loan," she'd said, sliding a check across the table. It was for $50,000. His full retainer. His amusement vanished. For the next 2 years, Laura worked. She worked 20-hour days. She expanded. She hired her first employee, a single mother named Sarah, from her apartment building. Then she hired 2 more. She leased a small commercial kitchen, then a larger one. Vale Artisan became the whisper on every foodie's lips. Her chocolates weren't just candy. They were experiences. The breakthrough came when a concierge at the St. Regis Hotel sent a box to a visiting travel critic. The review, titled "The World's Best Kept Secret," went global. Suddenly, Vale Artisan wasn't a local darling. It was an international brand. Purchase orders flooded in. Hotel chains, airlines, corporate gift brokers. The money was staggering. But Laura didn't change her lifestyle. She still lived in a modest, though safer, apartment. She still drove a practical car. She poured every single dollar back into the business or into other things. She began to invest, guided by Mr. Chen and a team of ruthless financial analysts. She bought distressed commercial properties. She acquired supply chains. She operated through a series of anonymous LLCs. She became L. Vale, the mysterious entity on paper that had brokers and bankers intrigued. She had become, in short, a ghost. A very, very rich ghost. Last month, her biggest deal had closed. A global distribution contract with a consortium of luxury hotel groups across Europe and Asia. The deal was valued in the high 8 figures. The Chevalier Tower, the newest, most high-tech building in the city, had gone into foreclosure during its final construction phase. The bank was desperate to unload it. L. Vale had swept in and bought it outright in cash for 30 cents on the dollar. The building, Mark's big one, was now just another asset in her portfolio. The ring had been a celebration. She'd walked past a high-end jeweler, seen it in the window, and bought it. A 10-carat cushion-cut, flawless canary diamond. It wasn't an engagement ring. It was a trophy. It was a bonus, she'd told herself, for services rendered. She had booked the private alcove at Aperture tonight for a reason. Her new partners from Zurich were flying in. Aperture was in her building. She was dining there tonight not just as a patron, but as the owner, to ensure the service was up to her standards before bringing her partners. She hadn't thought of Mark in months. He was a footnote, a forgotten error in a long line of code. She had no idea he even knew this restaurant existed. Mark stared, his mouth hanging open. It was Laura. But it was not. The Laura he remembered was soft. Her hair was a mousy brown, usually in a ponytail. She wore comfortable shoes and faded jeans. She smiled easily, a gentle, unassuming smile. This woman was an apparition. Her hair was a richer, darker chestnut cut, in a severe, elegant bob that grazed her jawline. She wore a simple, sleeveless black dress that was clearly painfully expensive. It wasn't flashy. It was tailored so perfectly, it seemed to be a part of her. Her only jewelry, aside from simple diamond studs, was a slim platinum watch on her wrist. She was thinner than he remembered, all sharp, elegant lines. But it was her face. Her expression was calm, neutral, almost cold. She looked, Mark realized, with a jolt, powerful. Mark, who is that?" Tiffany's voice was shrill, cutting through his shock. "You're white as a sheet. Is that her?" "Shut up," Mark hissed, not taking his eyes off the scene. Mr. Beaumont, the maitre d', was holding the velvet rope to the private section aside. "Your usual table is prepared, Ms. Vale," Beaumont said, his voice normally reserved, now laced with genuine deference. "We have the mineral water you prefer, and the kitchen has prepared the small pre-appetizer you requested." "Thank you, Robert," Laura's voice said. It was her voice, but the tone was different. It was crisp, clear, and commanding. She called him Robert. Mark had groveled to this man and called him Mr. Beaumont. Laura swept past, not even glancing at the main dining room. She was entirely focused, a shark moving through water. Mark felt a hot, confusing rush of emotions. First shock, then a dark, possessive anger. His Laura here. How he had left her with nothing. How could she afford to even breathe the air in this place? She must be with someone." He stammered, the words tumbling out as he tried to build a narrative that made sense. "That's it. She must be a gold digger. She must have found some old rich guy. That's the only way. This logic settled him. It was the only thing that could be true. His dowdy, boring Laura hadn't earned this. She had attached herself to it. It was in its own pathetic way an ambition he could understand. Tiffany, however, was not so easily convinced. She was watching Laura's retreating back with a sharp, calculating envy. "She looks amazing," she said, her voice tight. "That dress, that's a row. That's like $12,000, Mark." "It's probably a knockoff," Mark snapped, though he knew instinctively that it was not. "And who's she meeting?" Tiffany craned her neck. "I don't see anyone else in that section." "Her sugar daddy is probably running late," Mark said, trying to regain his swagger. He signaled for the waiter a bit too aggressively. "Another bottle of the Dom, now." He needed to reassert his dominance. He was the one who belonged here. She was just a guest, a +1. He was the player, but the image of her walking past of Beaumont bowing to her was burned into his brain. He couldn't focus on Tiffany. He couldn't taste the champagne. He found himself glancing at the alcove, waiting for the old rich guy to show up to confirm his theory to put the world back in its proper order. Then Laura, now seated at her table, gestured to her waiter. She was too far away to hear, but she was pointing at her water glass, and as she did, the light from the fireplace caught her left hand. A blinding, impossible flash of light shot across the room. Mark flinched. Tiffany audibly gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Oh my God!" "What?" Mark said, annoyed. "Mark, look at her hand." Mark leaned forward, squinting. He saw it. It wasn't a small, tasteful engagement ring. It was a rock. A massive, cushion-cut, impossibly yellow diamond. It was perched on her right hand, a declaration of independence. It was larger, brighter, and clearly more expensive than the 3-carat ring he had been promising Tiffany for 6 months. It was bigger than his car. It was bigger than his annual salary. The narrative of the old rich guy suddenly seemed shaky. An old rich guy gave you an engagement ring. He put you on a leash. That was a statement. That was a go-to-hell ring. Where did she get that?" Tiffany's voice was a jealous whisper. "Mark, who is he?" Mark didn't answer. He was frozen. The dead weight was sitting in the best seat in the city's most exclusive restaurant, wearing a diamond that could choke a horse, and she was being personally waited on by the one man in the city he couldn't impress. He felt a sudden visceral rage. It was an offense, an insult to him. She was flaunting this. She was in his mind, rubbing his nose in her betrayal. How dare she be successful without him? "I'm going to find out," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Mark, don't," Tiffany said, grabbing his arm. "You'll make a scene." But Mark was already standing. He was a man driven by an ego that had just been critically wounded. He smoothed his suit, finished his glass of champagne in one gulp, and started walking toward the private alcove. The walk across the dining room felt like a mile. The plush, obscenely thick carpet seemed to suck at his expensive Italian loafers a silent, grasping resistance. Mark could feel the eyes of the other diners on him. He had been the one whispering about access and power, and now he was putting on a show. He mistook their mild, wealthy curiosity for the rapt attention he and Tiffany had just given Laura. In his mind, he was the star of his own movie, a man of action and consequence, walking toward the inevitable dramatic confrontation. He felt in that moment like a lion reclaiming his territory. Laura did not look up as he approached. She was in the private alcove, separated by a low brass partition and a plush velvet rope. She was working. She had a tablet propped on the table, and she was reading a document, a slim, elegant stylus in her hand. A pair of simple, dark-rimmed reading glasses were perched on her nose. She looked like a CEO, not a kept woman. This discrepancy, this focus, only fueled Mark's anger. She wasn't even enjoying it properly. He reached the threshold, a tangible line between his world and hers. He didn't cross it. He stood there looming, waiting to be acknowledged, to be seen, to be feared. She didn't. She continued to read, made a small note in the margin with the stylus, and then swiped to the next page. He stood there for 5 seconds. 10. An eternity. He was being deliberately ignored. He was invisible. He cleared his throat. Loudly. A harsh guttural sound that was a violation of the room's sacred quiet. Laura. Laura's head came up slowly. Her eyes met his, and for one heart-stopping, agonizing moment there was nothing. No surprise, no fear, no anger, not even recognition. She just looked at him, as if he were a waiter she hadn't summoned. Then a flicker. She recognized him. The recognition, however, didn't bring warmth. It brought a faint, almost imperceptible sigh of annoyance. She took off her reading glasses, placing them carefully on the tablet. "Mark," she said. Her voice was flat, bored, and utterly devoid of emotion. "You're a long way from Red Lobster." The dig was so sharp, so precise, using his own past insult against her, that it momentarily stunned him. He had no reply. Before he could recover, Tiffany had scurried up behind him. "Mark, what are you doing?" She hissed, her fingers digging into his arm. But her eyes were not on him. They were not even on Laura's face. They were fixed like lasers on the impossible yellow diamond that was now resting on the white tablecloth, catching the firelight. Laura's gaze flickered from Mark to Tiffany. She took in the tight red dress, the desperate hunger, the poorly concealed ravenous envy. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if confirming a private hypothesis. "Hello, Tiffany," Laura said, her voice just as cool. "It's nice to finally put a face to the yacht photos." Tiffany flushed a deep, blotchy red. She knew. This woman knew about her. Mark finally found his voice fueled by the humiliation of both her insult and her knowledge. "Well, well, Laura," he said, forcing a sneer. He leaned against the partition, affecting a casual air he was nowhere near feeling. "You clean up nice, I'll give you that." "Don't," Laura said, her voice hardening just a fraction. "Celebrating," he pushed on, ignoring the warning. "Did you finally land one? Must be a very old, very rich one to get you in here. And to buy you that." He gestured to the ring with a jerk of his chin. "What's the matter? He make you wait here alone." He waited for the blush, the stammer, the defensive explanation. He expected the Laura he knew, the one who would shrink. The Laura he got simply raised an eyebrow. "You haven't changed at all, have you? Mark's still so impressed by things you can't afford. Still think the only way a woman can have something is if a man gives it to her." "Oh, come on." Mark scoffed a braying laugh that was far too loud for the room. "You're going to tell me you bought that yourself with what tips from your little data entry job? Did you sell a lot of cupcakes from that hobby you had?" "It's a chocolate business," Tiffany corrected him, her voice dripping with a scorn meant for Laura. "I saw it on Instagram. Veil Artisan. My friend's cat has more followers." She was trying to wound Laura, but also trying to reassure herself that this woman was still somehow beneath her. Laura actually smiled. It was a thin, cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're right. Our social media presence is terrible. I keep meaning to hire someone for that. I've been so busy with other things." She took a sip of her mineral water. "Logistics, international distribution, real estate. It's all terribly time-consuming." Mark's laugh died. "Real estate? What, you're a broker now, showing condos in the suburbs?" This calm, this control was infuriating. He wanted her to yell. He wanted her to cry. He wanted her to be the victim he had created to justify his leaving her. This powerful, cold stranger was an indictment of his entire life. "So, who is he?" Mark demanded, dropping all pretense. "Where is he? Or did you just come here with his credit card? That's it, isn't it? He sent you here to what? Order for him? Who bought you that ring?" Tiffany's voice was a shrill command, her jealousy completely overtaking her. "Was it that guy you're meeting, the one from Zurich?" Laura looked at Tiffany, and for a fraction of a second her expression softened into something Mark couldn't place. It might have been pity. "There is no he, Tiffany," Laura said, her voice quiet but carrying in the hushed room. "I'm meeting with my partners. 3 of them, actually. 2 men, 1 woman, all from Zurich." She then looked back at Mark, her gaze hardening again. "And as for the ring, yes, Mark, I bought it. For myself." "Bull," Mark snapped. The word was out before he could stop it. That's a 10-carat fancy yellow cushion-cut flawless diamond. That's $1 million stone." He knew. He'd been shopping for Tiffany's ring, and he knew what real quality looked like. This was beyond real. You... He was sputtering, and he knew it. He was losing control. He, the serious player, was standing here yelling at his ex-wife in the middle of Aperture. He had made the very scene Tiffany had warned him against. It was at that precise moment, as Mark's entire reality was fracturing, that Mr. Beaumont materialized at his elbow. His arrival was so sudden and silent, it was as if he'd beamed in. He hadn't been walking. He had simply arrived. "Mr. Johnson," Beaumont said. His voice was no longer deferential. It was steel. "Is there a problem here, Mr. Johnson?" "Mr." Beaumont's voice was not loud, but it sliced through Mark's tirade with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. He had materialized at Mark's elbow, his arrival so sudden and silent it was as if he'd been teleported. The air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Is there a problem here?" His posture was rigid, his hands clasped behind his back. He wasn't asking a question. He was issuing a final warning. Mark, caught between his ex-wife's impossible calm and the maitre d's icy stare, felt a desperate need to regain his footing. He was the player here, not the problem. He tried to laugh it off, to pivot, to make Beaumont his ally against this fraud. "No problem at all, Robert," he said, trying to mimic the casual familiarity he'd heard Laura use. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Beaumont's eyes, which had been cold, now flashed with open disdain. "I am Mr. Beaumont to you, sir," he said, his voice dropping to a low, distinct command. "And I must ask you finally to return to your table. You are disturbing our other patrons, and you are specifically harassing Ms. Vale." The public formal rebuke sent a hot, dark flush creeping up Mark's neck. He was being scolded like a child. In front of Laura. In front of Tiffany. "Harassing?" Mark repeated, his voice rising in disbelief. "She's my ex-wife. We're catching up. Tell him, Laura, we're just talking." He looked at her, his eyes a mixture of pleading and demanding, willing her to play along, to diffuse this, to put him back on top. Laura just looked at Beaumont. "Robert, it's fine. Mr. Johnson was just leaving." "Was I?" Mark said, crossing his arms. He was in too deep. Retreating now was admitting defeat. His entire constructed identity was on the line. "I don't think I was. I'm waiting for an answer. You're telling me you bought this." He jabbed a finger toward the ring. "You bought all of this. It's a lie." "It's all a lie, isn't it?" "You're a fraud, Laura. Just like you've always been." Mr. Beaumont took a half-step forward, his hand beginning to lift as if to signal someone. "Sir, I will not ask you again. Return to your table, or I will have security remove you from the premises." "Security?" Mark's voice cracked, the word exploding out of him. "You'd throw me out." The sheer insult of it, the public humiliation, was more than his ego could bear. "Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know the deal I am closing? The commission on this is more than your entire year's salary. It's in the Chevalier Tower." He had finally said the magic words. The effect was instantaneous, but not what he expected. Mr. Beaumont did not react, but Laura's entire demeanor changed. The mask of calm, bored indifference dissolved. It was replaced by a sudden sharp and very cold focus. She looked like a predator that had just heard a wounded animal in the brush, The Chevalier Tower. She repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. She leaned forward slightly. What deal are you closing, Mark? He smirked, sensing finally that he'd hit a nerve. He'd found the one thing that could impress her. His world, his power. Oh, now you're interested. Yes. My firm Dynamic Realty is handling the new commercial leases. I'm personally running point on the proposal. It's a massive, massive deal. The new owner, some recluse who bought it in cash, an entity called El Vale. They're about to make me a very, very rich man. Tiffany, seeing his confidence return, sidled up her hand possessively on his arm. That's right, she declared, looking at Laura. He's a player. He closes million-dollar deals. Not like whatever you are. Laura stared at Mark. She stared at him for a long, silent 10 seconds. The entire restaurant seemed to have faded away. It was just the three of them and Mr. Beaumont in a frozen tableau. Then Laura did something Mark had never seen her do, not in 15 years. She threw her head back and laughed. It was not a giggle. It was not a polite chuckle. It was a full, throaty, rich laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had just been told the most profound, complex, and utterly ridiculous joke in the world. It echoed in the hushed room, turning every head. The laugh cut Mark deeper than any insult, any slap. It was the sound of her not taking him seriously. "Oh, Mark," she said, wiping a small amused tear from the corner of her eye. You truly, you have absolutely no idea, do you?" "What?" He snarled, his face purple. "What's so funny?" Laura's laughter subsided. She leaned forward, her expression now one of almost clinical precision. Mark L. Vale, the mysterious entity. What do you think the L stands for? Mark's blood, which had been boiling hot, turned instantly to ice. He couldn't breathe. His brain tried to form the connection, but it was too impossible, too monstrous. What did you say?" "L," Laura repeated, tapping her tablet as if speaking to a slow child. "For Laura Vale, me." The silence that followed was absolute, a crushing void. Tiffany's painted-on smile twitched, cracked, and then collapsed. That's not possible," she whispered. "I bought the building 3 months ago, Mark," Laura said, her voice now as flat and hard as slate. "All cash. It was a foreclosure. The El Vale entity is my primary holding company. Aperture," she gestured around the opulent room, "is my tenant. This building is my property." Mark was physically reeling. He grabbed the velvet rope to steady himself. No, that's impossible. You make chocolates." "I do," Laura agreed, nodding calmly. "And Vale Artisan is about to become the anchor tenant for the entire ground floor retail space. We're forecasting 8 figures in revenue by Q4 thanks to the new global distribution deal I just signed with the St. Regis Hotel Group." She held up her left hand, turning the massive yellow diamond slowly in the light. "This ring," she said, "was a bonus, a commission, to myself, for closing that deal. The building, that was just a smart real estate investment." She looked at him, her eyes stripped of all pity, all memory. "You always told me I knew nothing about money. Turns out I'm a quick study." Mark's world had not just tilted. It had inverted, collapsed, and been set on fire. The big deal, his career-making moment, his boss's desperate fawning attempts to get a meeting with the mysterious owner. It was all her. He hadn't been celebrating a new future. He had been standing on her property, bragging about the crumbs he was hoping to get from her table. He stammered, his mind catching on the most horrifying detail. "You've been ducking my boss's calls. You knew it was our firm." "I don't duck calls, Mark. I prioritize them," Laura said, picking up her glasses. "And your firm's proposal, which I did review, was uninspired. Just like you." Mr. Beaumont, who had been watching this all unfold with a look of grim, quiet satisfaction, finally stepped in. His role was clear now. "Mr. Johnson," he said, and his voice was no longer that of a maitre d', but of an enforcer. "I believe Ms. Vale has made the situation perfectly clear. You are in fact trespassing on her property. You are harassing the owner. If you do not return to your table, pay your bill, and leave immediately, you will be arrested." "The bill," Mark said, dazed. "The Dom Perignon? The appetizers? The—" "Yes, sir," Beaumont said, a flicker of a cruel smile on his lips. "The bill, which I can assure you is substantial." Tiffany looked at Mark. Her expression of jealousy for Laura was gone. It was replaced by a new horrifying expression of cold reptilian contempt. For him. She suddenly and with brutal clarity saw him for what he was. A small, loud man bragging about a game he wasn't even qualified to play, much less win. "Mark," Tiffany whispered. Her voice panicked, her hand grabbing his arm. "Mark, do something." Mark looked from Tiffany's terrified, angry face to Mr. Beaumont's stone-cold gaze. And then he looked at Laura, his ex-wife, the dead weight, the coupon clipper. She was sitting there, the owner of his entire future, looking at him with nothing but bored indifference. She was about to give the signal to have him thrown out, arrested. His career, his life, his very liberty was in her hands. He had one last card to play. It was the only one he had left. Desperation. "Laura, please." The word was a desperate, dry croak. It clawed its way out of Mark's throat, a sound so pathetic it barely seemed human. In that single moment, the entire carefully constructed persona of Mark Johnson, serious player, evaporated. The swagger, the arrogance, the $2,000 suit, it all dissolved, revealing the small, terrified man he had always been cowering in the shadow of his own insecurity. He grabbed the back of an empty chair, his knuckles white. "Please," he said again, his voice cracking. I had no idea. You have to believe me." Laura said nothing. She simply stood there, her face an unreadable mask, watching him. Her silence was more terrifying than any rage. "I'm sorry." He gasped the words, tasting like ash. "I was an idiot. A complete arrogant fool. I was just trying to... I didn't know." He was babbling, his mind scrambling to find a foothold in this new inverted reality. His career, his commissions, his boss was going to fire him. He had just publicly, spectacularly insulted the one client his firm had been trying to land for 6 months. He saw a new angle, a last desperate lifeline. "We can work together, Laura," he said, a grotesque manic grin stretching his lips. He was a drowning man grasping at the anchor that was pulling him under. "This is perfect. Think about it. You need a broker who knows the building, who knows the market. I can help you. I can manage the realty for you. We can partner. Like old times." Tiffany, who had been frozen in place, watched this display, her face a mask of pure horror. He wasn't just begging. He was groveling. The powerful man she'd attached herself to was on his knees, and the woman he'd dismissed as dead weight was the one with all the power. Laura let his pathetic offer hang in the air, the silence stretching out until it became excruciating. She let him stand there, vibrating with his desperate, sweaty hope. When she finally spoke, her voice was so cold it could have cracked the crystal in the room. "Help me," she repeated, the words perfectly lethally enunciated. "You want to help me." She took a slow, deliberate step toward him. She wasn't yelling. She didn't need to. Her quiet, controlled voice cut deeper than any shout could. "Mark, you are the man who couldn't manage a joint checking account without stealing from it. You're the man who told me I was dead weight while you were standing on the foundation I built for you." Every word was a perfectly placed stiletto, and Mark physically flinched with each one. "You didn't cut me loose to become successful." She continued, her eyes pinning him in place. "You ran away because you were terrified that I was smarter than you. And you were right." The unvarnished, brutal truth of it hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had no response. There was nothing to say. "You come into my restaurant," she said, her voice rising just enough to be heard by the surrounding tables, who were all rapt. a restaurant you can't afford to impress a girl you're lying to. You brag about a big deal that you just tanked because you couldn't keep your pathetic, insecure ego in check for 2 minutes. You don't just not help me, Mark. You are a liability. She turned, picking up the slim leather briefcase from her table. She was done. The trial was over. The sentence had been passed. "Laura, wait, please," he begged. "Mr. Beaumont," Laura said, turning her back on Mark completely. It was the most profound, brutal dismissal she could have possibly delivered. "My partners from Zurich are arriving through the private entrance in 5 minutes. Please have a bottle of the Dom Perignon P2, the 1998 vintage, not the swill Mr. Johnson is drinking, sent to my private conference room upstairs." "Immediately, Ms. Vale," Beaumont said, his face a perfect mask of professional deference. "And—" Laura paused at the alcove's exit. She looked back, not at Mark, but at Tiffany. The younger woman was pale, her eyes wide, looking at the life, and the man she'd just bet on, both imploding. "A word of advice, Tiffany," Laura said, her voice softening just a fraction into something almost like pity. "If you're going to be a gold digger, make sure you dig for actual gold, not just brass." She then allowed her gaze to fall on Mark one last time. Her face was completely, utterly empty. All the history, the love, the pain, it was gone. He was nothing to her. "Have a good life, Mark. Or don't. I truly don't care." And with that she was gone. She swept out of the alcove and through a private, unmarked door at the back of the restaurant, a door Mark had never even noticed. She vanished, leaving a stunned, silent, and deeply humiliated dining room in her wake. Mark was left standing there, his face burning his suit, suddenly feeling cheap and tight. He was a fraud. He was the fraud. He turned dazed and looked at Tiffany. She was still standing by his side, but she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the empty space where Laura had been, and then at the exit. The calculation in her eyes was cold and quick. She knew a sinking ship when she saw one. Without a single word, she picked up her clutch from his table, turned her back on him, and walked away. She didn't storm out. She didn't cry. She just left. She walked right past him, through the hushed restaurant and out the front door, disappearing into the night before he could even form a word. Mark was alone. He sank back into the chair at his table. The half-empty bottle of champagne looked like a mockery. He was finished. His boss would fire him by 9 a.m. His reputation was ruined. He had just committed career suicide in front of 50 of the city's most powerful people. The waiter, the same silent one from before, approached his table. He moved with a quiet, funereal grace. He placed a small embossed leather folder in front of Mark. The bill. With a trembling hand, Mark opened it. The total was $1,845.60. He felt a fresh wave of cold panic. He checked his wallet. He had $200 in cash. He pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling with the banking app. His balance was $1,250. He had maxed out his credit cards on the Dom Perignon, the reservations, and the diamond bracelet for Tiffany. He couldn't afford it. He, Mark Johnson, the serious player, couldn't even pay his dinner bill. He was trapped. He was a joke. A man in a $2,000 suit who was about to be arrested for theft of services. As he sat there paralyzed by this final, pathetic humiliation, the waiter returned. "Sir, I was asked to add this to your table." He placed a small, impossibly elegant black box on the table. A simple gold V was embossed on the lid. Mark opened it. Inside, nestled on black velvet, were 2 perfect, shimmering, dark chocolate truffles dusted with edible gold. "Compliments of the owner." The waiter said, his face a perfect professional mask. Mark stared at the chocolates. He stared at the bill. And for the first time in 15 years, he felt the true crushing and absolute weight of his own failure. He had tried to impress his new girlfriend, and his ex-wife had, just without even trying, taken his entire world. The dead weight he'd claimed to cut free was, he now realized, the only thing that had ever kept him afloat. and he had just watched her sail away on an ocean of her own making. They say karma isn't just a concept, it's a bill that always comes due. For Mark, it came on a leather tray in a 5-star restaurant he couldn't afford, delivered by the very woman he'd thrown away. He called her dead weight, but he was the only one who sank. Laura didn't just get revenge, she got everything. She didn't need a man to buy her a diamond. She bought her own with the empire she built from the ashes he'd left her in. What did you think of Laura's ultimate comeback? Have you ever seen someone so profoundly underestimate the person right next to them? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you love this story of justice and vindication, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story.